Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Cindy Lynn. I am the co-founder of Hey Social Good, and we are a social impact analytics company. I'll talk a little bit about my background because it really informs of how I created Hey Social Good. So I'm an environmental data scientist by training. I used to work at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for like 20 years, started as a student, and then went all the way to do policy, lawsuits, standards development, both in the US and internationally. So I worked on behalf of the US government in China for about 10 plus years, working on environmental and policy issues. And then had kind of like a conniption fit about, what is it that we're really doing in policy? And I discovered that both our data is not available to the public, not because it's not around, but because people don't know how to access good data to make better decisions. And then the second part is that over 90 to 95% of funds in the US is held in private organizations. So when I really think about where impact is going to take place, I realize that we need to inspire and encourage businesses and other organizations to do different things, make different decisions. And so created Hey Social Good. And what we do is our bread and butter is we assess and verify businesses for their social, sustainable, environmental, ethical practices. And we use a combination of expert domain knowledge and also simple machine learning tools of data capturing and assessing so that we give you a much faster return, a snapshot of what's happening in the space, so that people don't have to always fill out a survey. More than 95% of businesses in the US don't do anything. It's the corporations we hear about like Unilever or that are doing because they have the funds and they have the capability to do so, but most businesses, small to medium sized, can't get there yet. So we wanted to offer another option for them.
Love it. Kelly. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Cindy, because I don't know if you know, but you have been a mentor to me in this process. So my background's a little different. I used to be all about the profit, not for the people or the planet. And probably about 5 years ago, I had a shift. Actually, I think it was 2016. I did a beach cleanup where there was just so much microplastics, and I was horrified that I hadn't really noticed that in my own home beaches. And so I started, we were doing some posting around the beach cleanup that we had done. And this is a group I work with. And I just started learning more about, the recycling stat of how little of the recycling actually gets recycled. And I was horrified. And that just slowly kind of turned into this path. I'm kind of like an all or nothing personality. So I just sort of went all in. And so my background is accounting. I'm a CPA. I do contract CFO work, back office support and bookkeeping, but I'm also a B certified company. I got that certification in the very end of December of last year. So very proud. I'm also a benefit corp. And I've gone through your assessment, which was really fun. So I just started seeking out different ways that I could incorporate. It really started in my home first, of making transitions in my personal life, which was for me a little bit easier to do. Like, okay, start buying toothpaste tablets. And, every time something would end, I would try to find an alternative. And then I thought, how can I bring this into my business? And then here we are today, where I've incorporated a bunch of different things into my business. And I work with small businesses who are usually interested, or I like to have conversations about the options of how fulfilling and rewarding it is. And on top of it being the right thing to do for the generations to come. So very excited to explore this topic with you guys.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. I want to ask too, Kelly, talk a bit. You are an owner of a bar on a boat. Like, how does that play into this concept of sustainability?
Yeah, so that was actually one of the first areas that I tackled, because in a service-based business, I wasn't sure how to really incorporate it. So my bar business, we started with looking at local distillers and brewers that we could have on the bar and represent them. So we have some local partners. And then I looked into options for cups and found out that that was a little bit more challenging, because the composting is not as easily accessible of the cups that even say compostable. And then the biggest way for the Mahalo bar is I have a 1% for the planet promise. And then I also do a profit share. So I do a 20% profit share to my bartenders at the end of every month. So that feels really like a great way to give back, and always looking for new ways to incorporate sustainability and good in that business.
I'm sure Cindy has some ideas for you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm teasing.
We've had it. I mean, I think that's what's inspiring even about Kelly, because she didn't come from that. And it's like, I'm just going to do it. And so just in that track, able to achieve all different things and making that impact in a different way, that is unique to your business, but also everything that you touch. And I think that people who start that journey, that's what happens, right? It's kind of like when you mentioned at home, at some point you're like, oh, I'll just do with bringing my own cup. And then you're like, oh, well, that's kind of fun. Well, maybe now I'll look at toothbrush. So it's kind of just builds. And I think, and then it kind of spills over. And at some point you just realize, well, why isn't everybody doing this? But you don't realize that you've been doing it for a year or 2 years. And I think that's the idea for me. It's like a sustainable journey, not so much that you can be sustainable. Earlier I was telling someone that sustainability is such a funny word, right? Because people say, we're a sustainable brand or we're this, and yet you always have someone that says, really, are you sustainable? Well, do you do this? You're like, oh yeah, well, I haven't gotten there yet. And so I think even a brand like Patagonia this year has said, we're not a sustainable company. We aspire towards sustainability. And I think that's for us at Hey Social, what we want to do is empower businesses to get on the journey. So wherever you are, that's great. So if you haven't started, awesome, start tomorrow. If you are a third of the way through, great. Well, there's even more to do, because the truth is, if you think about businesses like Unilever or Patagonia, they've been doing it for decades, and you can ask them, they're like, are you done? They'll always say, no, we've only done 50%. And so I think the idea is the nature of creating a business has a negative impact. That's okay, because we all need to make a living, and that's the way economies work. I think to a point mentioned earlier, which is we have to get to a point of that triple bottom line, right? The planet, profit, and people. And if we can show that it works, then it's a win-win-win. And I really believe, like even what Kelly's done, is you can do it. It's just a different way of thinking, and knowing what the options are.
So I just want to define, and then let's go to questions here. There's a lot of terms around what we're talking about. So we build this as social impact, and then we're talking also about sustainability. Like what are these definitions? Just based on your opinion, because I know there's lots of definitions, So let's start with how do you define social impact, and then how does sustainability fit into that?
It's interesting that the term social impact is in play, and I'm so excited because I think I've been saying that word for 5 years. And people are like, what's that? But I think part of the reason is that the impact of social activities, and then social is a much bigger coverage, right? So social has to do with ethical or code of conduct or governance, diversity issues. But the truth is, anything that's external includes environmental. I think generally mainstream, this is, what I've seen, generally mainstream people think sustainability is environmental, but that's not the case. So if you consider like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, it covers 17 goals and covers the whole gamut of everything from no poverty to, green infrastructure, right? So I think for me, social impact covers it all. And I'm happy to see now people are talking about positive impact of social practices. That's how I think of it. Sustainability is almost an overused word because people have different ideas of what it means. Frankly, someone might think like, oh, but we're sustainable. My company is sustainable because we have sustainable profit.
I'm a yogi, so I think of it, anything that'll bring people to the mat, and like if it's just for exercise, and then they realize that there's this beautiful practice in philosophy and in yoga. I think of that as sort of like, this is like an entry word, sustainability, where if it gets people talking about it, I'm okay with it. Like, let's have conversations about it. Let's talk about, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to you? Because I think when I first started this journey, I thought it just had to do with the environment. I didn't understand the people part, the social part. And now to me, when I hear or think sustainability, I really think that like people, planet, profit, force for good model, looking at all of your stakeholders, not just your shareholders, your complete supply chain. Basically, for me, it's almost like my goal is to do no harm. And since that's not possible, then I find ways to offset it through offset credits and things like that. So for me, it's looking at everything. I mean, every dollar that you spend has an impact, whether you realize it or not. I mean, every single dollar. And it's very complex. One of my favorite little practices is like thinking about all the people it took to make the meal that I have.
Yeah.
And it's like, it would take you so long between the farmers, pickers, the people that stock at the shelves, the drivers, and there's dollars attached to all of that. It's like a matrix. That's cool.
If you think about the age group of your consumers or customers, so now it's like over 50% of people with, a wallet or, kind of money to buy are under the age of 40 in this country. So, and this is a group of generation that are really digitally savvy, information savvy. And they don't want to know that you just say you're eco-friendly. They want to know why. So I think there's that basically push towards it. I think the pandemic with our supply chain challenges have really also kickstarted it. And then actually the third thing is in 2020, BlackRock, as a huge investment firm, made the announcement that every single investment they make will have to have some kind of that ESG rating positive score, ESG being environmental social governance from a financial perspective, right? So ESG metrics are just like, for example, how many carbon pounds per dollar. And so that's how, or, what's the diversity of women diversity. And so those metrics have shown to be really effective as showing kind of a positive return on your investment, literal return on your investment. And I think that those three things kind of trickled into this whole thing of, I have seen acceleration of businesses randomly saying like, I guess we need to consider it, because now either your customers really want it or demanding it and they're asking about it, or your shareholders are saying like, wait, what are we doing about that? Because why aren't we getting another percentage positive, net positive, right? And then also even within your team, right, your company and your employees are saying like, well, I want to work for a company that has good governance. I don't want to work for a bad company. I can just go to any company right now. So why would I stay here? So now as a company, you're like, I better think about that too.
Yeah.
So I think those three things in the last few years have really kickstarted, but really just maintain that balance. I hope it's not a trend. Like that's what I'm a little bit worried about. Is that right?
Stick.
Yeah, that I hope it sticks. And the sticking part is what some of you have said, which is that people have shown there is a real return on investment. As long as they stay in the game for more than a few years, they'll see like, oh, that panned out. Like now I'm actually paying less, kind of like solar for your home. People are like, yeah, it was a big investment upfront, but oh, now I'm actually saving money. So I'm if we can ride that wave, then this won't go away.
Yeah. So let's get to the conversation that came up in intros, which is sort of this alternative class of entities in a public benefit corporation. And I say alternative super loose because I get this question all of the time, right? So typically people think there's for-profit companies and nonprofit companies, and there's nothing in between. And so I may be miscategorizing, but it feels like this idea of a public benefit corporation and then the B Corp certification feels like somewhere in between, basically, but I may be categorizing that wrong. So let's break down what is a public benefit corporation and then what is the B Corp certification. And who on God's green earth decided to name them something almost the same, right? Like it's such bad branding because they are not the same.
They are not the same. Yeah, yeah. Do you want to take one? I'll take the other.
It took me a while to figure that out too. When I was I was just saying it interchangeably.
Yeah, because it feels like B Corp is short for public benefit corporation.
Well, so do you know the history of that is that the founders who created B Lab or B certification, it's a nonprofit like 20 years ago. And actually another person who wrote the original book, Ryan Honeyman. And they at the time had this idea of like, what we need to do something better. So they created this set of assessments and standards. And they had this idea of like, we can get them through, we should also create this other type of corporation called benefit corporation. So I think that's where the confusion comes. But now 20 years later, they're very different, separate. There's a lot of great overlap where, it's supportive. So that's good. But we're a benefit corporation. So I'll talk about benefit corporation. And I know you're a B Corp certified, so you should talk about that. But benefit corporation is a C Corp. And instead of having one goal or one profit goal, you have a dual goal or multiple goals. You have a profit-driven goal, potentially for your shareholders if you go public. And you also have a social mission goal. So that if you say you're a public company and you basically have to respond to your shareholders, now you can say we are making a profit and we need to make a positive net benefit. And so for me, that's what a C Corp is. It's a benefit corporation. So, and then there's B Corp certified. I'll have you explain.
So B Corp certified, like Cindy was saying, is a B Lab is a nonprofit, and they do an assessment, pretty lengthy assessment, but it was really fun to do because it made me think of things that I never would have thought of, like a policy on composting. So now I compost. But it's a third-party assessment, a series of questions in different areas like employees, your supply chain, governance, and they really take you through different standards, and you have to get a certain amount of points to be able to qualify to be B certified. And if you don't get the point threshold, you can work on different areas of the assessment to try to bring that score up. But it gives a lot of flexibility on how you accomplish certain things. It will ask generally, and then you can say how you do it in your business or how you plan to do it. And it's a lot about assessing where you're at and then setting metrics to improve. So I had to I was weighing my trash and my, that's why I now compost, because my trash was really heavy. And I was like, how can I reduce my, how much I put in the landfill? I was like, I can compost. So now that'll be a metrics on when I do my research, that I started where I am, and then I have a goal to reduce at a certain point. So yeah, I think last I checked, there was about 4,700 B certified businesses
In the world.
In the world. So it's small.
Is that your accounting firm that's B certified, or the restaurant?
My accounting,
or
yeah.
the bar?
Yep, my accounting is B certified. And so for me, it was a lot about, as a service business, like I have a top line give back, 3% give back on the top line revenue. So that was a big area of showing how I give back, and then who I work with. So a huge way that I have found how to put these different elements into my business is I hire a lawyer who's also B certified, and I hire minority, if I can, a minority contractor in that area. So yeah, so all different ways that you can find, and then you have to show proof of that in your assessment. Even things like if I have to buy any office supplies, I got my computer from a used computer store. Like any purchase that I'm going to make, I stop and think, ooh, is there a better way? And there's not always a better way at that time with the constrictions of timing, but sometimes there is. And so that can be, or who am I going to partner with? Who am I going to work with? And now picking the companies I work with. So they ask all that. If I was working with a bunch of companies that were doing a lot of harm, that would negatively affect my score.
And is that a score? Do you go through that assessment on an annual basis?
It's every 3 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they actually, when I applied, they had changed it. So they required me to be a benefit corp in order to even apply.
First,
Yeah.
interesting.
Whereas before you had 3 years to get that status, but it's a legal commitment that you're going to put all stakeholders, or at least not just profit, as the number one goal.
Like, how does one become a public benefit corporation? Like, not every state recognizes that. Like, what does that process
That's
look
right.
like?
So I think about 14, 15 states in the US only have an opportunity for you to self-identify as a B Corp or offer that B Corp certificate. Sorry.
I know, it's like they're so closely tied.
A
It's
benefit
like status,
corporation
right?
status. So for example, Hey Social Good is actually, we're basically our corporate structure is out of Delaware, and both California and Delaware have benefit corporations available. Both have different requirements and structures, et cetera, but they're all very comparable. to that. I will say that, however, my thing that I worry about is 5,000 B Corp certifications that's in the world. So if you think about how many businesses are in the US, so I won't even talk about solopreneurs, it's about 20 million.
It's a small number.
So so this is what I give a lot of thought about, which is, why is there a gap? Like, why is it that, how can we get more businesses to get onto the bandwagon or just change some of their decision points, some of their choices that they're making, right? So that's a lot of, and so I say that because there's a lot of different ways to get on that journey. So B Corp certification is definitely one way. So for example, when we, Hey Social Good Assess, we look at all kinds of certs. If you're a B Corp certified business, you automatically like meet a minimum criteria for us. Because we already know you've gone through that very stringent approach that is very much focused on your company operations. We also at Hey Social Good look at external impact, which I know B Corp is doing that a lot more of this whole giving back, but we also track and assess, for example, your external activities and practices. So such as, if we try to identify, does your business provide, drinking water well, for example, in another country or in the US, we try to pull that information out. So there's so many different ways of going about it. So what I think is important is that businesses find a way that matches them and fits, where they are.
But it sounds like we can't get a B certification unless we are a benefit corporation.
I guess, and that's new. They
That's
didn't
new.
have that before. So it's like
Like a
another
layer. Yeah.
another basically, structure that you have to get through. And if I think about it, I think part of it is that they want more businesses to have that dual goal, which is super important. A lot of people don't even know what benefit corporation is. They didn't even know that they could do that. I actually believe that if most businesses understood that there was that option, they're like, oh yeah, we'll do that. I'm gonna incorporate anyways. What does it matter? But and so I think part of that is like, my guess is people will have heard it and they're like, oh, I didn't even know I can do that. And now they have to change it. It is true that when you change structures, that's work. But then again, all of this is work.
But
right?
not
So-
that much work. I mean, we went through it and we're Nevada Corporation, and you are amending your articles of incorporation. You pay $7,500, can't remember. And you were just, I mean, it to some extent is not as monitored as being a B Corp, right? I don't go through an assessment. I just simply claim my stake, basically, of saying, here's what I'm going to do. And then you have to report out on it every year by a third-party standard that no one has really defined.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, I know. Believe me, Janelle Dahl and I went round and round on this for like ever. We're like, what is the third-party standard?
Yeah.
So, so we have, a page on our website where every year by March, the following year, you have to report out on what your public benefit mission is and how you met that benefit. But is anyone checking it? No, I mean, to some extent.
not yet.
Okay. But hopefully they will, because it feels a little willy-nilly right now.
I think it's slowly happening. Like
Awesome.
it is like not checked so much. Well, so this is, I mean, even B Corp, they've been developing these standards for 25 years or, something like that. So they have their own set of standards, but it's really hard to identify a global standard. So like UK has their own standards. The US doesn't, because we don't. There are a lot of recommendations from different, organizations in this space, right? And so you can follow those as models.
Mhm.
But I think part of it also is this idea of like, I don't want to be limited as a business. And I think the way around this is to be transparent. So like, it's hard for anyone to track anything, but the truth is, if a company is 100% transparent, right? So like, here are hubs, they're like, here you go, this is what we do. You can check all that.
Yeah.
Right. If someone really wanted to, they can check out that. The businesses who don't, well, then you kind of know. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, most people are pretty digitally savvy, information savvy. If they don't see something now, they're like, I wonder if that's real. And then you just need a few of those customers before you get into, social media. People are like, well, I don't know if I trust them.
Mm.
So I think for businesses, your credibility is super important
Yeah.
to just put out there.
I did make some changes when I went through my B Lab assessment because it made me think, which was cool. But at the end of the day, like I was still gonna, whether I got the certification or not, whether I decided to pay the fee, the annual fee, whether I got all the points exactly the right way, I was still gonna operate
Yes.
the way that I wanted to operate, which is to my best ability, not to do harm and to give back and have a positive impact and uplift the consciousness of business. And I think sometimes having that visible sign, or it lets people know what you stand for if you
Yes.
really mean it. And so that was why I thought that was important for me, that I wanted to be able to have that. And it's becoming more known, even though it's surprising actually how often I see that be in the circle, seeing that there's only 4,700 businesses. I
Yeah,
mean, it's kind of
I know.
bizarre, actually.
And then here's the other crazy stat. Almost 40% of those are in France.
Wow.
Oh,
France.
wow.
Wow.
Interesting.
I love your stats.
Oh, yeah.
So first I'll just explain like the difference is that it's interesting because you said it, like what are the activities a business is doing, right? So I also want to highlight like the best part about a B certification is almost an education for yourself. And there's someone there guiding you. Like it's kind of like you're running a marathon, you need a coach. But some people just want to do the 5K, right? And some people I just want to do the 10K. I can't do a marathon yet. I don't have the ability to do so. So for us, that's why we use the advantage of data information and technology. And so we do 75% of the work for you. So we go out and we just data capture everything. And it's almost like pre-filled for you. The other thing we do is we identify all the practices, which is a little bit different because it comes from this idea of the philosophy of Jesus Good is how do we track positive impacts on the ground, right? So it's not just enough to say, we give water, right? Are you influencing water quality impacts? And so the underlying structure is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we broke down the 17 goals into near 1,000 different activities, right? And so then we try to cross match you because the truth is, to your point, you're like, I can't do those things yet, but here are the positive things I'm doing. And so maybe you're I hate the idea of this net negative because I don't think that's helpful. It's more of you just continue to add on additional activities that is positive instead of thinking like I'm net negative. Because frankly, the reason we don't have a standard is how do you develop a standard for a fashion brand? Who has to consider the supply chain? How do you develop a standard for, cereal bars? So how do you come up with, there's over 450, almost 500 different types of certifications in the world in this space. So which one do you use? It's like this never ending black hole, right? So it has to come back to the point of if you're just committed as a business and I just want to do the right thing and make better choices. Let me just change things. So like we work a lot actually with fashion brands. And so one of the things we always say is like, what do you do with your scrap material? Or like, oh, well, we just dump it. Oh, maybe you can, instead of dumping it, donate it. Like there's all these different ways. So my goal is hopefully we can create a circular economy, right? Whatever we produce is people, then we kind of reuse it and value it. Like thrifting is such a huge thing, which is awesome because it's like whatever we were going to throw away, well, now we applied a value chain to it. So I think for you to answer your question, it's identify, either just keep your own track record, kind of like what you do with DI, and start just identifying what these are the things we're doing and keep a record of it. When you're ready, you can go someone to like B certification, or you can go to an organization like ours where we help do it for you and set you up on that journey. My whole thing is identify every single practice that you think is a better practice. Track it. Like open up a spreadsheet. You guys are all service people. Start putting in there like, this is what we did. This is what we shifted to. Because whenever you get ready to do more, you already have that record. And I really think for me, and maybe that's because of my background, the record is really important that you can speak to. If anybody asks, well, how are you sustainable? Or how are you social good? You're like, let me pull it out, So you put that on your website. Like a lot more brands are just like, we're just going to put it all out there. You can see it for yourself. All of the good and the ugly, because in some ways, I think what that shows your customer is like, wow, that's a real story. You went from having 10 printers that you printed paper out, 5 years ago, and now you've eliminated all printers to go electronic, and you put that on your website. We're like, that's cool. Now,
Mhm.
does it fit within a category and be certain? That one does, but there's a lot of things that you do that may not fit, and it's okay.
Tracking of your expenses. So that's a really easy way to start, is to actually every month when you're first getting started, or for the rest of time, is look at your numbers. And instead of just looking at the numbers for the profit part, be like, what did I buy? Let me see. And you open it up and you see what's in that category. And you think, like, you just have the conversation with yourself, like, could I have chosen something different? Did I have to get this?
right.
And so for me, it was like things started popping up, like, okay, power, like, what about my power? Is there an option here? And then it's like, oh, there's community choice power where you get cleaner power. And so I've enrolled in that. And then it's like, oh, what did I buy here? Oh, office supplies. Oh my gosh, wow, I bought more on Amazon than I realized. I got rid of my Amazon, because you just buy things really quickly on Amazon Prime. So things like that. And I just use my P&L. So with businesses, we do
Yeah.
that exercise, and it's because every business is so unique that it's hard to kind of, you can say a few things, but for your business, just go down your P&L.
Actually, what I'd love for people to leave today is to eliminate guilt.
Yeah.
Because the reason, that's where I live, the world of guilt. Because, back when I worked, I always say this, people would meet me, I'm like, I'm really sorry I didn't recycle. I'm like, doesn't really matter actually. But I just feel, but then it stops you from doing different things. So it's okay if you didn't get it right today. Guess what? There's tomorrow. So I would just have all of us not think about what you didn't do yesterday instead, and focus on like what you're going to do tomorrow, because the guilt prevents us from doing more. I feel like.